Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to our webinar on the road ahead, marketing during a pandemic and beyond. This webinar will run for an hour, with most of the second half made available for questions from the audience. Please be sure to add your questions in the chat box as we go along, and I will be pulling out as many questions as time allows. In addition, this webinar will be recorded and be made available later. My name is Nasser. I lead strategy at DAC. For those that are unfamiliar with us, we are the world's leading digital agency specifically built for national and international brands that need to transact at the hyperlocal level, both on and offline. I'm delighted to be joined today by a distinguished international panel. Now, you see two people in front of you. We have four people, two are on audio. So the first person who's on audio, going from across time zones from east to west, we begin in the UK with Andrea Dearden, the marketing director with David Lloyd Clubs, which is the most significant network of high-end health clubs and gyms across Europe. Andrea leads the marketing team to drive retention and acquisition of new members in existing markets and development of the David Lloyd Clubs brand into new European markets, including Germany, Spain, Italy, and France. Welcome, Andrea.
Hello, everyone.
In Charlotte, North Carolina, we welcome Alicia Mauder, head of US marketing at Circle K, one of the world's largest networks of convenience stores. A passion for creating amazing guest experiences has driven Alicia for over 10 years in the retail and restaurant industries. In her time at Circle K, Alicia has been critical to developing the US marketing team, new brand strategy, a comprehensive marketing calendar, and a guest focus to every campaign and touch point. Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us. In Austin, Texas, on audio, and which is a shame because I can assure you he looks just like George Clooney, we welcome Tim Rickards, marketing director with Charles Schwab, among the largest financial institutions in the US. Tim leads activation and engagement efforts for self-directed investors at Schwab. His team connects with clients through a combination of automated and ad hoc campaigns based on numerous behavior and needs-based segments. Welcome to the panel, Tim.
Thank you, Nasser, and for everyone, I do not look like George Clooney at all.
Modest as ever. And last but certainly not least, in Vancouver, British Columbia, we're joined by Manoj Jasra, CMO of Northland Properties, a diversified group that owns brands such as the Sandman and Sutton Place Hotels, Moxie's Grill and Bar, resorts such as the Revelstoke Mountain, and even professional sports teams like the Dallas Stars NHL team. He was previously head of digital at WestJet and vice president of digital and customer experience at Shaw Communications. Welcome, Manoj.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone.
So let's get started. Thank you, by the way, everybody, for coming together in what is a slightly unusual set of circumstances in terms of a panel online. We'll work as well as we can through any kind of technical challenges and so on. As I mentioned previously, please, folks, as people have questions, put them into the chat box, and I'll be gathering and sifting through them for the second half of this panel. Let's get started. We're working in a deeply disrupted environment, and much has been said and written about the new normal. Now, I would like to focus the majority of this conversation on looking forward, but I'd like to start us off by asking, given all the disruption we're experiencing, specifically, how has the pandemic changed the role and responsibility of the marketer? And I'd like to start with Tim to answer that question.
Thanks, Nasser. So when I think about the change, and I've been pondering this for the last day or so, the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is we're in a new environment now of scarcity and insecurity. And that's a marked change from what you might have considered a couple of months ago. And I think that can happen quickly. And because we're talking about mindset, it may or may not be related to actual material insecurity and scarcity, but that's what our mindset is. And within that umbrella, I think that the role of anthropologist and psychiatrist that a marketer plays becomes even more important. So we're in a new situation and a new mindset. How are people's needs and motivations changing over time? Right, that becomes even more important. And then how is that evolving the relationship with the products and services that we're marketing with our clients and customers? So in good times, it's easy. You know, when the Dow is climbing up and people feel affluent and positive and confident, it's pretty easy to sell things and it's pretty easy to create mutually beneficial experiences. But when all of a sudden it changes, you got to go a little bit deeper. And so that goes to that second role for us, which is the marketer as translator. How do we translate what we offer to these folks out there who are in this mindset of scarcity and insecurity? And how do we encourage those mutually beneficial transactions I talked about in a way that's appropriate and relevant? So much smaller margin for error now, much more sensitive market, sensitive, if you will, response metric. And you're trying to talk to people who are in a position where they may or may not feel able to make decisions. And it's an interesting conundrum for us because, you know, we only prosper when our customers and clients do. So they're in a position of perhaps not prospering. They may be even facing, you know, life and death medical situations. So how do we talk to them in a way that can reflect that reality, but also provides whatever we offer in a positive and beneficial light? And I think it's important to note that even something that is in essence a diversion, one might think, oh, it's a serious time that doesn't have a place. It actually may have even more place now. People need diversion, people need happiness, just like they need nuts and bolts, for instance, what my company does. So just brief summary, I think our role is even more important. And I think our role of translator and anthropologist is even more primary to what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm fascinated by this idea of being an anthropologist or translator. Frankly, you need something to translate, and typically as marketers we look to data, and you know, a lot of our old data models just don't exist. So Manoj, if you can build on what Tim has said, give your perspective, but also think about this like, where do we get the data? Where do we find the insight in terms of how people are feeling, what they're looking like right now? Tim, you mentioned the DAO. You know, the DAO seems disconnected from a lot of the things that are happening to many people in the real world, as it were. I saw a funny quip the other day that the DAO is nothing more than a graph of rich people's feelings. So I don't know how you feel about that, but where do you find data to translate, and how does that then impact the role and responsibility of the marketer? Right, Manoj?
Yeah, the DAO is definitely not a great representation of what's happening in the hearts and minds of the people and what's happening in our industries, for sure. It's totally a roller coaster ride there. From a data perspective, I think the things that we look at that impact us the most, I think we look at the qualitative and quantitative feedback right from our customers. The consumer perceptions, the attitudes and behaviors, I think that's what we really look at to understand, you know, what is there trust in the market to travel, to go out for dinner, to go out for gatherings and activities. So we're relying on survey data and data from within our industry and our vendors to come up with that. I think those are better checks and balances and touches on pulse in regards to what's happening out there. Obviously, a lot of things are measured and given to us from the government approach as well. But I think it's important for us to keep a pulse of our own. And I think who better to do that with versus your customer itself. I think we've got a good national spray across, especially across Canada. So I think we're looking at a pretty good diverse data set. So that's been helpful for us. In regards to the role and responsibility of the marketer, I think it's shined a massive light in regards to how important our roles are and how diverse our marketing function is. It's way broader than the outward looking, it's advertising, it's content and creative. It's just we have become so immensely adaptable, and we've had to do that and become leaders in this kind of time of the pandemic. So in my group and in discussions with my peers, I see marketers as a problem solver. For example, internal and external communications. We've been having to manage uncharted territory. So how do we give a sense of calm internally, messaging really, really appropriately in regards to what's happening, and how do we do that sensitively externally as well? Tim kind of mentioned it in regards to it's a sensitive time to market, obviously understanding the overall situation. So how do you do that with a delicate touch while driving business where business is not there as much as it used to be, and especially in our industry, and balancing that with communication that's actually helpful from a community perspective and helpful to your internal staff as well. I think the marketer as being even more involved in the strategic planning and direction. So when we look at our customer experiences in the future, especially in the digital marketing landscape, we now need to provide where we're supposed to be making investments necessary to survive now and elevate ourselves coming out of this and accelerate ourselves coming out of this in the future. And finally, I would say maybe the most important one is the leadership side. How do you corral the organization and be that connective tissue across the organization to really help march down a consistent path? I think these are ways that the marketing responsibility has changed. It was always there. It's just now expanded and accelerated more than ever before.
I love this idea of the leadership function, and we're going to come back to that later, as well as this idea of how do you position the organization not just to survive, but ultimately to thrive. That's part of the function. But focusing on the now, when we think about, you talked about customer feedback and those kinds of things. Given the environment that we're in right now, a lot of the channels, platforms, the mix has kind of suddenly shifted in terms of effectiveness and usefulness in the moment. So right now, what are your most important channels and platforms for communicating with and promoting to your audience? And perhaps Andrea, if you want to start off with that. I'm very mindful that in your space, in the fitness space, it's particularly challenged right now, where people cannot physically go to your locations, and that's one of the primary revenue drivers for you. So given that, what platforms, what channels are most useful for communicating with your audiences right now?
Thank you. I guess we're a membership-based organisation, which I'm not sure how many people are on this call. And our focus, whereas our focus is quite often about acquisition, our focus has shifted mainly towards retention of our current members and treating them in the way in which we would want to be treated in this kind of situation. You know, it's very difficult, I think, when you're used to getting revenue to then kind of turn it off. But obviously, you don't want to do anything in this kind of situation where you harm the future of your membership and your relationship, because that's the absolute core of what drives the business forward. So we obviously have communicated an awful lot more, and it's on a very much needs-based basis. So I think whilst the incident was developing, looking back, we went through certain emotional reactions, I think, and I'm sure every business did this, which is, you know, about crisis and then how you start building your future business. But we were always very clear about the fact that members were key, team members and their security and their safety was key, and also that of our future suppliers, because we very clearly identified that moving out of this, we would move out of this at some point, and you know, you can debate how quickly or slowly that will be, but there are a few more core people, but those were the kind of 3 key areas. And then the communication channels were primarily through digital. We also developed a new product, so we I don't know how we did it, but we moved quite quickly in developing an on-demand product, which we didn't have. So one of the key propositions that defines our clubs as opposed to other kind of what I would call gyms, we're more clubs, we're more country club oriented. And one of the key things that defines us away from the gym market is the fact that we have really, really strong communities. And all of the channels were about how to keep that community going whilst we were closed. And that related back to an on-demand product. We created a run club, which we'd never had before. So we had 660,000 members, and we've now got about 5,000 of our members in a run club, which went from 0. It doesn't sound like an awful lot, but you know, that piece of engagement is really, really important. but it was all communicated through digital and actually owned channels rather than earned channels. And I know we'll come on later to talk a little more about spends, but we tried to use our own channels to keep members engaged, and then any kind of broader communities through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Vimeo, but it was very focused on members.
You know, it reminds me, I was just writing this down as you were saying this idea of creating essentially an entirely new platform in the middle of this, you know, this idea that if necessity is the mother of invention, then crisis is its helicopter parent pushing it forward.
Yeah.
So on that, you know, you're primarily focused on digital channels to be able to communicate with people. Alicia, in your space, it is different because the stores are open. And frankly, they're a critical part of people's lives and infrastructure. What are you using to communicate and promote to people right now?
You know, the stores, they're essential businesses, so all of our stores are open. And as we look globally across the network, the need to tell people that we're still there, we're still here for them, especially a new cropping of people who may not have been in stores recently, but either may not want to go to a large format grocery or retailer due to concerns about being around large groups of people, wanting to be able to get in and out quickly, or frankly, for necessities that grocers may be out of, that Circle K or other convenience stores may still be in stock in. There was absolutely still a need to keep some above the line media at a point where you saw most everyone else pulling away unless they had an e-commerce platform. So we naturally, you think about it, you shift away from traditional radio, you shift away from out of home, people aren't in their cars driving as much. But more so than the disruption to the media plan, you know, we're still very present in search. We're still looking at digital, social, both owned and paid. The messaging is what saw the biggest disruption. So it shifted very much from let's come out and buy 3 for $5 Red Bull, which is still an offer that we have at stores. And it's more of a, we're here for you. We have your essential items. We started highlighting things like free coffee for first responders and healthcare, which one of the first companies to go out with that. So the tone very much changed in the messaging versus the channels, and the ability to how we placed that media also shifted. We wanted to make sure that as you think about people's state of mind, our customers and potential future customers, as they are scrolling their Instagram or their Facebook, if they're researching articles, the article may be changing from how to plant my summer garden to how do I tell if I have COVID-19 or not. And obviously being sensitive to the message that you're putting out there, where you're buying that media, and what stream of consciousness your customer may be in at the point of disruption. That message has to be incredibly well timed. We're much more detailed in looking at those placements of buys, and also really sensitive to the diversity of messages that we're putting out there, because again, hitting someone over and over with the same message may feel a bit opportunistic or tone deaf in the time frame. You've heard that a lot in the marketer community. How do you not be tone deaf right now? So evaluating and continuing to change. I'll say we're looking at media plans on a daily, weekly basis, where before it would be more of a almost you set your plan, you have your playbook, and you go to market with it. So as the situation evolves, we're watching it sweep across from Asia and Europe into the United States, and we're in constant communication trying to stay on top of that. But you know, we're really focused on the channel, staying present and assuring people that we're open, that we're taking the safety precautions to help adjust that. And then how do we ramp back up on the other side?
Perfect. Manoj, do you want to build on that?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Alicia on the heightened awareness in regards to sensitivity and messaging. I think everyone needs to be extremely aware of how they position things. I think the balance between merchandising effectively versus those community and authentic based messages are hyper important as well. You know what, if you're not authentic and you try to dive into spaces that you don't appear that you have a direct relationship to, I think you get called out fairly quickly. And I think marketers have to be aware of that. I think there's a lot of Me Too type movements happening, and you know what, the timing of that, when to kind of participate and when to just lay back and just be an observer, I think it's a delicate balance there as well. I think like most folks, we are also continuously heavily investing into digital and social. They remain areas of focus. But I would say especially on social, you probably agree with this, is that it is noisier than ever before, because not only are brands participating, but everyone at home has now become even a bigger content expert. So you see the accumulation of TikTok going to Instagram, going to Facebook, going to LinkedIn, like you see it all coming together, and everyone's sitting at home creating amazing pieces of content. And it's hard for multi-million-dollar brands to participate with a person who's got 1,000 followers and they're using their iPhone, and it's amazing content because it's authentic. And that's you have to compete with that, because it's all share of eyeballs at that point, right? So if Alicia mentioned, like, people are scrolling and they scroll meters and meters of content with their thumbs each day, and that's kind of hard to believe, right? But how do you stand out for just a second or two to create that authentic experience? And the way we look at it would be, I think, we're going to heavily invest into a content creation engine, looking at the speed of what we can deliver. I think speed is important as people are creating content. Understanding when to post time-wise and time of day and how often you need to post has become important. Otherwise, you lose that top-of-mind awareness fairly quickly. I think the marketers have to be aware of micro events that are happening and really keep a pulse of what's happening in the community, what's happening within the vertical, and then be able to participate in and out and pepper in and out that way. And I think it's time that we all truly believe that it's not about perfection. It's about authentic, real experiences. Like we previously were posting, like before, and I've seen this across multiple brands, everyone was posting these perfect images, perfect lighting, perfect kind of video. And now you look at it, it's really authentic, community-based driven, a lot of sharing, user-generated content. And you know what? That is resonating like 5 times more than the perfect pictures that existed before. In addition to that, I think email has become a more important platform. Andrea kind of mentioned it, because of retention and because there's a one-to-one relationship from an email perspective, that conversation allows you to have it one-to-one versus 1 to a million. We started to actually use our email subscriber base as an opportunity to do market research, not just say, here's a message, but can you tell us what's going on in your life, so that when you're ready to come back and do business with us, we can be authentic back to you in regards to the amount of business that you want to do with us. And then finally, I would say is we've tried to do a really good job of understanding where demand is. So on our hotels business, we know that our websites and things like that, direct channels are taking a hit, but there still remains demand on third-party platforms such as Expedia and TripAdvisor. So we are trying to cultivate partnerships there, whether that's through the third parties or internal groups where they're managing more different types of relationships, like our sales groups. So I think understanding where demand is and participating on those channels versus trying to just stir up organic activity where there's not, I think it's important to understand that from a pure data perspective as well. And maybe finally, the one thing I'll leave it with is we now have to put our egos aside. Our typical strategies aren't working, so we're going to have to partner with our peers and organizations to actually make this work effectively as well.
Yeah, I hear you. You hit on I think really one of the points that you made around speed. It's kind of one of the rules in crisis communications, that you get out fast. You make a decision and you move quickly, and nobody expects you to be perfect. But if you're 70% right, you can change and you can pivot and all of that sort of stuff, but you're still further ahead than the person that hasn't moved and they're waiting to be completely 100% right. So I think that's a really, really critical insight. But speaking of speed, maybe in the other direction, Andrea, you touched on this earlier about the reaction from a lot of brands initially at the start of this pandemic. It was pretty significant from a lot of brands in terms of pausing or stopping or pulling back in a lot of sectors, and we've actually seen that the impact, the real impact has been of the pandemic from a business perspective has been asymmetrical, and it really varies by industry, it really varies by location. So with that in mind, and I know it was also mentioned around the tone and the sensitivity of the messaging, have marketers gone too far in pulling back sales and promotional messaging?
It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because if you look at history, if you look at any of, which I'm sure we've all done, any of the kind of previous financial crashes or anything like that, the brands that spend through are the ones that come out stronger. It obviously always depends on whether you have the finance to spend through these kind of situations. And again, it's dependent on your kind of tone and your messaging. And I think timing is really, really important. So interestingly for us, we're certainly from an acquisition point of view, we are quite sales oriented, and we did pull back really strongly from that because it didn't feel appropriate. But that's more of the tone and the messaging point of view. And we did a little bit of a test around some people were still inquiring about membership. Interestingly, you know, we had 600 people inquiring about 10 days to take out a membership, which I found was really, I couldn't understand it at all when they knew we were closed. Anyway, so actually the sales teams rang up those people and tried to sell them a membership with a promotional offer, and actually had a pretty good response. So interestingly, as long as you're making sure that you're relevant and you're understanding the situation that people are in and they're showing some interest, then you shouldn't pull back too far and do maybe tests just to see how the audience reacts. Because, you know, we did a bit of it, but it was very relevant and it was very timely, and it wasn't the hard-hitting sales message that we would normally make. But I wouldn't pull back completely because we had a bit of success with it. So, you know, that's my view.
That's good insight. So pivoting then, and this idea of testing and so on, as we begin to look forward, what do the next 6 to 12 months look like? Tim, if you want to kind of pick up on that.
Sure. Well, you know, if you look at the economic side of things, and this is me just as an individual citizen, it's looking pretty murky, right? 30 million people have applied for unemployment benefits in the US. The Canadian unemployment rate is something like 7.5 or 8%. US GDP is down almost 5% in the first quarter. So at the very least, the next 6 months are going to be extremely uncertain. We don't have a vaccine. We're not even sure that there are really great candidates. We're not sure we have a treatment. And we're beginning what I've been calling the great and gradual reopening. If you looked ahead 6 months, we're in October. So we're actually right at the doorstep of flu season again. Like, oh no, we're here we go again, right? So I think for the first 6 months, it's really about flexibility and relevance. Everybody who's spoken has had good points on how to try to think about what you're doing right now. If you're going to be trying to achieve acquisition, do it thoughtfully and carefully in a targeted fashion. Retention, that Andrea mentioned, is huge. Obviously, keep the people you have happy. I think local messages, pitches, programs are even more important now, especially when you consider the reopening. Folks are just going to be going out again. I think their hesitancy, obviously, to get engaged is pretty high. So we have to be flexible while we do that and look at what's happening. Do we see these spikes in infection rates that cause local economies to close down again? Treatments and vaccines. How does unemployment in the economy move forward? I think that's where you look over the next 6 months and try and just figure out, you know, have we hit this, and I'm not talking about the market, I'm talking about just in general, have we sort of hit the bottom, or are we bouncing about? If you go out 12 months, that's next April. We'll have been through another flu season. And when I look at what's going to happen between November and April, we're going to have a United States election. We'll go back through flu season. We will be in the window potentially of what you might consider to be the time it takes to develop a vaccine. You know, by that, I think a lot will have changed, and I think it's up to all the businesses, but especially the marketers, to just keep a close eye and be looking that 3 to 6 months ahead. I don't know how long it takes everybody on the call, how long it takes your group to do marketing, but in a large company like mine, it takes a long time. So we constantly have to be looking ahead. The last thing I'll say is to go back to the anthropologist, translator, and Manoj talked about problem solving. So a bunch of behaviors have been adopted now en masse at the flick of a switch. And behaviors and attitudes. So how sticky are those? And I think that's where I would be looking at vis-a-vis those behaviors and my business. So if it's health clubs, how much are people staying at home? How well does virtual work? If it's stores, what do you see from traffic patterns or demands for curbside or whatnot? If you're into rental and leisure properties, is there going to be a bump because people just want to get away because they've been cooped up in their house? So I think it's important to have somebody or a group of people watching those behaviors to see how much they stick. Because, and I've had this discussion with friends and family and work colleagues, you know, there's a definite movement within our international psyche. We want to go back to where it was, but that doesn't exist anymore. So, and it's not even a new normal in a sense, that because it's just what is this new situation? What will we decide collectively to adopt as our new mode of being over these 6 to 12 months? And I have no idea, but I think that's really important, because then we'll have the cues, we'll have the customer data. Because to your point much earlier, the market, that just shows you what the market thinks. That doesn't show you what people think. But people's behavior will give us a sense of their cues and their mental situation as we move forward. And that's where we can be useful. That's where we can get the mutually beneficial transactions.
Thank you, Tim. So let's build on that. I think this idea that the next phase of the pandemic, it's going to include significant ramp-ups in testing. There's going to be continued physical distancing, and it's going to be extremely regional and local in terms of the easing, and then potentially reimposition of restrictions as well, as things kind of spike and ebb and flow. How do you tackle that need across your respective footprints, given that we're talking to people who, I think, almost all your organizations, or all your organizations, are in fact international in nature, regardless of your individual responsibilities. But how do you do that at the scale that you need to do it, especially to help people feel safe and encourage them to come out and engage with your brand? So Alicia, why don't we start with you?
We've had to put in a bunch of those in place already since we've remained open. So if you look at things like markers on the floors, barriers, gloves, masks, a lot of those are in place, increased sanitation practices. And one of the things that we've learned has worked best is as close down to the store and the customers you can get for those decisions, the better off you are. Sitting in a corporate office trying to make decisions for, what is at some point community and township level regulations just does not make sense. And I think what Maj said around the playbooks that we had before are gone is absolutely right. So if you look at first, there was a little bit of this conversation of, can we pick back up with the plans that we had put in place pre-COVID and get back to those and just keep running with them? And at this point, we're saying, listen, anything that we had pre needs to be reworked, even if we end up with a similar answer, because it all has different information. We have more consumer and touch points that we've had before, as we see them more active on social. It's not just TikTok videos that we're seeing a huge surge of customer comments and feedback, letting us know everything that we're doing right, and more importantly, the things that we're not doing right, and how to listen to that, to respond to that. We're also starting to put out full surveys to hear from them and say, what makes you feel most comfortable? It's, the mask is a great one. There was a big concern when, employees started wearing masks of, are you trying to protect yourself from us, or are you sick and now we're being protected? And all of those different dynamics are so important to listen to from the customers that are coming in every day, from our store associates, how they feel about it. And then most importantly, being sensitive and being very flexible. The ability to turn, promotions that would normally take 6 months to get out, we're getting out in 72 hours, and continuing to allow that flexibility and understanding that it may not be the beautiful poster that all of us marketers would love to put up in the window. It may be an 8.5 by 11 sheet of black and white paper that you tape up to let them know that, dispensed beverage has to be closed, or whatever it may be. That flexibility to show them that you're real-time responding and that you're listening is important. But, at this point, we're still prepared for continuing to keep a lot of those measures in place until we see, you know, individual restrictions open up. More importantly, our customers saying that they're open. And you saw that with Chick-fil-A came out today and said they'll wait to open their dining rooms until their customers and they feel ready to do that versus what the ordinance says. And I think we'll follow a similar approach. Is we'll listen to how the customers are responding. And so far they've been great. They've been very willing to keep coming in. They are purchasing a lot, but we're listening closely to those pieces.
So let me push you a little bit further on this. You talk about the need to do this and listen very closely at the local level, at the community level, and you know, try not to control everything from central, from corporate, and loosen up, democratize the decision making, as it were. That sometimes goes at odds with digital communications, especially when we think about the fact that it's been said a couple of times so far that digital channels are currently the most effective channels and platforms in terms of communicating with audiences. So how do you square those things, given that a lot of digital communications and channels tend to be run at a national level or what have you? Does it need a rethink in terms of how these channels and campaigns and activations, communications need to be structured and run?
Absolutely. And, you know, in full disclosure, we have a bit of an advantage at Circle K because we've always ran a decentralized model. So we have very few promotions that actually get pushed out from a corporate level. Most get pushed out. We have 14 kind of regional offices across the United States. We have 4 in Canada. We have, I think it's 9 in Europe. So everything ends up becoming very regional and localized as our natural part of Circle K's business model. But from a digital perspective, you know, we all hold hands on the things that are critical in terms of sanitation, in terms of having the essential supplies, the key programs, you know, something like Feeding America, which is a cost marketing campaign, everyone aligns to, but how that looks at a local level, we provide toolkits, we provide guidance, and then there's that trust and accountability at the local level that they take those and are best equipped to support, and so that we're making sure that we're always in line with that. But it's challenging, and you know, it's not perfect and it's evolving, but especially I think we had a bit of an advantage already being structured like that. If I look at some of the organizations that are almost entirely corporate led, it's a much more challenging setup to try and make that move.
For sure. Andrea, do you in your experience, do you agree? Do you disagree with that perspective?
No, I completely agree. I mean, we run a similar model really where, interestingly, if you think about the corporate, I think most of our members don't feel that they're necessarily part of the corporate business. They feel that they belong to a local club. And that's really, really important because what it does is it builds the relationship with members. And then members disagree with the centre, but it wouldn't necessarily affect the relationship with the club as much. So certainly from a digital channel perspective, we run certainly our, like Facebook, for instance, on a very local level because it's about the things that the club does to include everybody in the community. So I completely agree with everything that she has said. I think the only other thing that we're probably looking at, and it's actually probably more as a kind of an industry, is whether we go above what the government is saying, or if there are things within our clubs, for instance, that we know that members, and a lot of this is based on insight, and you know, members will pick up on things that we won't always think about as a corporate body. But so we're always listening to them, but getting feedback, doing member surveys, and we don't want to over survey members, but you know, member surveys are really, really important to understand the things that they think are very important, and then listen and reacting to that. It has to be quite a fleet of foot, I think. So, you know, I definitely agree with all of that. Don't really have anything to add, I don't think.
No, that's great. So we're talking about structure. A couple of the things that have come back in terms of what people have said is around this idea of speed, which for large organizations is it's the antithesis of what marketing looks like in a lot of these organizations, or not just marketing, but the entire operation. So when we think about the organization itself, a disrupted environment, it prompts a rethink of your requirements as an organization. How do you retool your internal team in order to take on this different landscape? And what are the particular skill sets that you need to develop and source? Manoj, if you can pick that up, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've always had a lot of success in a T-shaped approach in terms of how I look at the types of individuals that participate in our team. So the kind of the base of the T represents core characteristics: culture, problem solving, aptitude, and how do you really drive that. And then the horizontal is basically core skill sets. So that could be technical, vertical, those areas, but that creates a very hybrid type person for you. And then I look for people who can bring a variety of full stack experiences. So in the development world, the idea of full stack developers can be applied to marketers as well. So a designer who can write or who can play in the social space, digital marketers who understand not just great advertising, but great user experiences, brand leaders who understand the power of digital, but how customer experience is our brand experience and leveraging that. And then one line under that in regards to core characteristics, the problem solvers, being able to put people in uncomfortable situations and then see how they can thrive from that. And you need those types of players now and in the future, then more than ever before. And then there are a couple of hot skills that I'm finding that are going to be hyper important in our market as well. So I'm going to be heavily looking at in our current team and new team members, how do we build content creators who can write, direct, capture stories, and tell stories? I think that's going to be hyper important. Digital marketers who understand how to drive outcomes based on business goals, working with large amounts of data sets and leverage automation to drive acquisition as well as loyalty. So those, I think, will become really, really hot skill sets in terms of structure and the importance of that as we go forward. And then I think you touched on it a number of times, Nasra. Agility is going to be hyper important. Agility to drive outcomes to help your business thrive. And for example, we had to do this ourselves for 4 weeks ago when we had to start shutting down some of our restaurants and go to takeout and delivery. We had to light up e-commerce. So for Denny's Canada, we lit up e-commerce with our partners in like 3 weeks. And a person on my team, her name is Alex, I'll give a shout out to her. She's a marketer. She got plugged in and she lit up that e-commerce engine because she had to from an agility perspective. And that just talks to the type of players that we need on our team.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you're hitting on this idea of leadership. You're also talking about skill sets and outcomes. So outcomes imply performance. How do you adjust your leadership approach, given that it's difficult to judge individual performance when there's so many factors and challenges that each employee may be faced with in the moment and over the course of this period? Alicia, perhaps if you want to pick up on that, and Manoj, if you want to build on whatever Alicia says, especially in the context of what you were just sharing. Great.
Yeah, it's a challenge because everyone is experiencing something different, and that's not only for our teammates but for our colleagues, for those around. And if you haven't had some form of Zoom or Skype mishap yet, with children running in or something like that, there's a lot of compassion that it starts with, but I keep the team grounded in the idea, and Tim mentioned it earlier, the margin for mistakes right now is really small, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but those missteps, and brands get judged in times of crisis, and you think about, especially being global organizations as we all are, there's accountability for the store associates that are employed. I mean, Circle K has more than 130,000 people employed around the world, and those mistakes can cost sales, can cost, stores to close and things there. So there's very real weight to that. And continuing to, obviously stay in touch, stay engaged with the team, listening to the struggles that they're having, keeping them grounded, very clear, direct information sharing, being very open and honest, but also clear on expectations and where that's coming in. And then I think, Manoj, you talked on 2 really good points. Really right now we're focusing on a skill set around customer first, always looking to what's the right decision for the customer. It was there before, but it's imperative now. And then storytelling. This opportunity where there's so much life that's happening in between every little moment and so much change, and being able to tell a story in a way that's compelling and understanding helps to work through that. But it's certainly juggled. The skill sets are important, but making sure that you're keeping that level of responsibility always present, because there's a job to do at the end of the day. And this is not a 2-week type of thing. We're already 8 weeks in. The US longer in other countries, and there's not really an other side that's coming on. And so the ability to perform during these times is critical for individuals as well as the brands.
Awesome. Yeah, just to add to that, I would say you can totally measure the importance of a person's kind of leadership capabilities when you put them in the toughest times, and this is maybe the toughest times that most of us have experienced in our careers as well. We've seen a very significant impact to our teams and businesses. We were hit fairly hard. Our teams and organizations went from full capacity down to a very skeleton crew just to adjust to the current norm. And I think a few of the things that come to mind in regards to how do you lead in this difficult time, I would say empathy is a massive one, empathetic to the overall situation. The idea that the environment is super uncertain, right? Both for businesses, people's lives outside of work, and people become scared for their health and their loved ones in addition to what's going to happen with the business. So empathy in regards to how you lead and being in touch with that. I think leadership with purpose is hyper important. Providing confidence, which instills some semblance of stability, is hyper important. Being transparent into the business impact. So there's no sense hiding what the results of the business are. I think transparency helps people understand context, and context is hyper important. Thirdly, I think setting priorities. There's no way that you can do, especially during this time, even prior to this time, there's no way a person should have a top 10 list, because you can't accomplish 10 things really, really well. So you might as well do 2 or 3 things really effectively versus 10 things and dilute your overall capability as well. I think trusting your team members is hyper important. Then that getting them to participate as insiders so they can help carry the weight and the load, basically, and the attitude that kind of Alicia mentioned in regards to working with the attitude of we're in this together is another one I try to put a big point on as well. Sharing small successes. So everyone is meeting daily, by every other day, with their teams, and even the smallest moments of success get you through to that next time. I think that's been great. And I think what we shouldn't forget, and Tim mentioned this a few minutes ago, we're learning to lead in this critical time, but we should take a lot of this attitude forward as well. We shouldn't just be leading like this now. We should be leading like this forever, because why not? We're learning these amazing capabilities, and I think we should be able to apply them in the future as well.
Right. So let's talk about the future, and let's talk about opportunity. There's a famous Tell Us and Tell Us study, and it looked at how brands reacted during every major crisis going back to the Great Depression. And it found that brands that didn't cut advertising during these events were able to see significant and lasting improvement in sales and revenue. I think, Andrea, you had touched on this. So if I can ask you to start off with this, what's the opportunity for brands to emerge stronger than the competitive set out of an event like this? And what do they need to be doing right now in order to realize that opportunity?
I mean, if I, it kind of goes back to the things I was saying earlier about kind of relationships with members. Absolutely call for a membership-based organisation, but also the internal teams and your own teams. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has. Obviously, everybody's been on Zoom, but I'm really interested in looking at people's rooms and things that are coming out from a relationship point of view within internal teams that I don't think would ever have come out. So in some sense, it's building that sense of, to what Meredith just said, those little elements is kind of building stronger team relationships internally, because you're seeing different sides of people. So I think that's important. And from an external point of view, one of the things that I guess I'm focusing on is how we leverage our competitive advantage. We have really big format clubs, and probably the industry is largely peopled by smaller underground, really good, fantastic operators. But our clubs are very, very different. They're much bigger. We can do social distancing probably more easily. We have the relationships that some of those. So you just look to your really strong points in terms of your competitive advantage and make sure that in any communication that is coming through, giving reasons, supported very, very much by all of the safety elements to make sure that, say, our members and our team members feel comfortable in the working environment. But I think that clarity of competitive positioning is really, really important, and it's something that you need to think very, very clearly about communicating.
Perfect. Manoj, can you build on that for a second, please?
Yeah, Nasser, I think I read a very similar kind of stat, and it was a McKinsey stat, which talks about the resilient brands who are in the top 10% of their competitive set out of this can carry a massive momentum for the next 10 years as well. So how we act and invest is hyper important. I think making the right investments to close gaps. So like we're looking at a variety of technology initiatives, even during this this pandemic, which we may have not. I think there's amazing partners out there who want to make deals at this point so that they can help you over the long run as well. And it helps you kind of be a accelerator versus coming out at the similar pace as before. Re-emphasizing prioritization and truly doing like forced ranks in regards to what are your true priorities, because you could, like I said before, you can only work on 2 or 3 things effectively at the same time. From the previous question, I think massive opportunity to define and refine skills. It would be a crazy failure, I think, to come out of this without new skills. That would be a failure in my mind. And then from a branding perspective, I think there's a huge opportunity to develop content, brand stories, and deeper connections. Tim mentioned it, doing business locally. Our commitment to safety, health, wellness is going to be important. Going beyond advertising, looking at ways that content will resonate with our overall audience. And it's okay to be low budget, as we talked about before. I'm a big proponent to creating frictionless experiences, and that's end to end. Customers have high expectations, and reducing customer effort is something that I'll be looking to do at every touch point, because I think that has a massive impact to loyalty engagement. I think now is the time to really understand and refine that, and to kind of reiterate using these agile approaches and rethinking how we've done work in this time. I think we have to take that with us to move quicker, because we all can move quicker and more efficiently as well.
Thank you. Alicia, last word on this from you, please.
I mean, everyone has said it so well, and Andrea brought up a lot of great points around the relationship. I think, we're framing it kind of in 2 ways, this idea of showing up versus selling things. So going back to the Red Bull example from earlier, it's not about 3 for $5 Red Bull, it's how do we say that we're here for our communities that we serve, we're here for not only our employees, but the customers, and showing up in a way that's authentic to your brand, that's not jumping on a bandwagon, but also that's making a positive impact. And I think the other thing that we're talking about is solving problems. There's a lot of problems out there that need solving, and people are looking to brands that have a way to solve those in a unique and different way, but that is approaching those issues that they're at hand, whether it be something as simple as toilet paper that they need, if it's, testing, if it's, the variety of different things. Brands that can sit here and solve problems for consumers are the ones that will win in the long run when some of those discretionary spending things pop back up, when people are more inclined to step into the other areas. And you've seen some tremendous movements, especially on social, where brands have started to step in and take things that feel maybe a little different than the products that they sell, but it's a way of helping to solve the very real problems that are there for their customers in the day-to-day. I think those are the brands that will endure, because as the McKinsey study said, customers remember that at the end, and those are the brands that are really engendering themselves in the hearts of the customers. And when we come back, when things become more stable, that holds a presence. So the relationship piece is absolutely critical. Andrea said it well.
So brands that solve problems are the ones that will be remembered. And to take it back to a comment that was made much earlier in terms of what the function of the marketer and responsibility of the marketer is at a time like this, it's as a problem solver. So the responsibility at a time like this for a marketer in terms of their face to the customer is ever more central and begs a need to be even more active and even more focused than ever before. That brings us full circle. Thank you to everybody that has participated. Thank you to the questions that were coming in. This is what we have time for today. Big thank you, Alicia, Manoj, Tim, and Andrea, for your insights. It's been lively, and it certainly provided new perspectives. I appreciate the breadth of experience that you've brought to this, not just from an international perspective, but also the industries. And I also appreciate the positivity that you're bringing collectively and individually in an environment where you have been very disrupted, some more than others, but nobody can say that you know, they're doing exactly what they were doing before. I like the types of themes that were discussed, and I just want to say thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.